G'day groovers, rockers, and in between. This is Vinyl Vibes. I'm your host, Jack Hodgins. Today we are talking with rhythm guitarist of Hermits, Keith Hopwood. Hermits were one of the most popular bands in the mid-1960s, even at one point outselling the Beatles. Keith joined the band in 1962, and by August 1964, the band recorded their first UK number one hit, I'm Into Something Good. The group would go on to have 11 top 10 hits in the US and 10 top 10 hits in the UK. Keith would leave the group in 1972 and founded Pluto Music, a company that composes musical scores. Today, Keith is still making music and in 2022 released his first solo album. G'day Keith, and welcome to Vinyl Vibes.
Hi, good to see you, Jack.
Let's start at the beginning. You were born in Manchester, UK in 1946. Do you remember much of your childhood?
The very early days, no, not so much. I start to remember probably when I was around 11, 12 and started getting interested in music. So I kind of remember that bit from there.
Yeah, what was some of that music that you kind of remember listening to growing up?
Well, I remember hearing the first. I mean, the house wasn't a very musical house. There wasn't a lot of music going on. I remember eventually hearing bits of rock and roll on the radio, and sort of Fats Domino and the Everleys, and the sort of it'd be what, the late 50s. The year I went to the high school, to a grammar school, I unfortunately broke my leg on the first day of the summer holidays. So it was like a big 6-week holiday. I got hit by a car on my bike and broke my leg. So I was kind of laid up for the whole of the summer holidays, and that's when I really got interested in it. And, I'd got a guitar then. So I kind of got stuck into it a bit there. I didn't have a choice, I couldn't go anywhere. So, and it went from there, really. I just got sort of more and more interested in the music and, learning. Once I got a few chords together, you can play along with these things. They weren't, the music then, the rock and roll stuff wasn't terribly complicated in a way of chords. So, once you got a bit of a knowledge, you could join in. So that's what we did. And it went from there, really. And then I had a pal there, Malcolm Rowe, who was just as keen as I was, but he was a drummer, or he was an aspiring drummer. That's what he wanted to be. So we spent a lot of time together, just analysing these records and playing along, and then eventually started a band when we were probably about 15. Something like that, and that was the start of it. So we were still at school then, but we got a few guys together and did it. So we were the keen ones. The other three were sort of a bit come day go day, moaning about rehearsing and things. But it worked. Yeah, we did all the usual local gigs and things like that. So yes, that was the Falcons, and we were going for a year or two. I mean, it was not easy because obviously we're all like 15. Well, I think the singer was a bit older, but nobody had any vehicles, so you had to get lifts to and fro. We had a man with a van, who basically took most of the money that we got for the gig, went to the man with the van. But we didn't care. We weren't doing it for the money. We just wanted to play. So that was fine by us. And so we roamed around, just the working men's clubs, they were called, British Legions and things like that. And that's what we did for a year or two.
Yeah, I mean, what were some of the records you were kind of like the songs you were kind of playing in the Falcons?
We were doing probably, the Shadows were very big at that point, Cliff Richard, the Shadows, so there was all this instrumental stuff that we did. A lot of Buddy Holly tracks that we did, because they were perfect, they're all fairly simple and, not massive productions. So, fairly mimic what was on the record, that kind of stuff. Not so much Fats Domino because we didn't have a piano, but yeah.
Yeah, and of course, through the Falcons, there was a rival group, Pete Novak and the Heartbeats, and that you guys kind of came together.
They were going at the same time, Pete Novak and the Heartbeats, and then at some point in the summer of '63, their guitarist decided he'd got to leave, and so I don't know whether they'd actually seen us or heard of us or what, but they came round and knocked on my door and said, do you want to join our band? So I'd never seen them either. So, and by this time they were called Herman and the Hermits. They weren't Pete Novak anymore. So I said, well, I'll come and see your band. I wanted to see what they were like. So I went to see the band, and I just wasn't impressed at all. So, musically it was not brilliant, but they had a manager and they had more gigs, and the gigs made more money, and it was all, and they were all very keen. And so the combination of all this against the sort of not brilliant music, I thought, well, we can improve that probably. So I jumped ship, and I went with them, and that was sort of autumn '63, and we carried on. We did a lot of gigs, roaming around just around the northwest of England, but going further than the Falcons had gone, because we had the manager, so he could get us gigs that were further away, and ballrooms and things like that, rather than just all working men's clubs. So yes, it was all up a notch, financially, and the amount of gigs. We were doing quite a lot of gigs, sort of five a week, 6 a week. Sometimes we did 2 a night. Sometimes we did 3 a night. We'd do one gig, go to another gig, and end up in some strip club in the middle of Manchester. So we did a lot of work. Yeah. So that was it for about 6 months, and of course, all we wanted really was a record deal, which we couldn't get, and we kept trying, and but there was a basic fault with the band. The fact that I didn't think they were very good musically was because 2 of them couldn't really play as well as they should have done. And eventually, when you go into a studio for an audition, that's the first thing that shows up. You're not going to get a deal, because you couldn't fix anything. You just had to do it on the spot, one take, and that's it. So we tried all these different people who had auditions, and none of them worked. And then eventually we went to see Mickey Most, and he gave us an audition, which again failed miserably. And so at that point we thought, well, we've run out of road here. So we had to change the band round, and that's when Leck came in. It was immediately sort of a lot better, a lot tighter, and our manager got Mickey to fly up to Manchester, and we took him to this club in Bolton that we did regularly, and they loved us there. So it was a really big reception, and that was it. So he said, yeah, that's better. So and then eventually he sent us a copy of this I'm in Something Good, the Earl Jean record from the States, which had been released there. It was a small hit. I think it was 40 something. And that was it. And he said, so we just learned that, and eventually trucked down to London, went in, did that on the B-side in 3 hours like you did, and that was that. That was the first record. So it was all very, from that point, it was all very quick. We'd done for 6 months, and then once we'd found Mickey, it changed the band round. Then it was literally like a couple of months to recording it, and then they put it out very quickly because they were going to release Earl Jean's version. So the record company rushed it out, and within, I think, 3 or 4 weeks it was number one, so which was off the scale really. So that was, it was completely beyond belief. I mean, all we wanted was the record deal, and to hear it on the radio, that would have been enough. If we'd just heard it a few times, that would have lasted us for a year. So, but for it to immediately go in 3 weeks to number one was pretty cool.
And look, listening to the track, I mean, because you played acoustic guitar on that track, right? It's because it doesn't sound like there's a lot of electric.
No, there's just Leck playing. I mean, it's just one of each. I mean, in those days, the recording, it wasn't even stereo. It was one track recording. So you would go in the studio, you would play the instruments down, and that's it. And then you would bounce. In other words, you play that back, and on top of it, you would then do the vocals, and that would bounce to another machine. And that's it. That was the whole recording process. There was no adding this and that and the other. You just got, because the more you added and bounced it, the worse the quality went, So I think we added the vocals, and we maybe added a tambourine or the clapping or something like that. But everything else went down in one take. So there was only one of everything. There's one acoustic, Leck on electric, and a piano. We had a piano on that one. It was very simple in those days, and that's just how everybody made record, because nobody had the multi-tracks hadn't been invented at that point.
Yeah.
So it was kind of simple. And that's why it was so quick, because in 3 hours, that was the length of a normal session.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And look, I think you mentioned the success you had. Like, it was only just 3 weeks. I think you mentioned that the 45 was out and it's already number one in the UK and number 13 in the US. I mean, that must have been pretty great for you guys. Like first single and it's already a success. That must have been great for you.
It was, yeah. I mean, with hindsight, in a perfect world, it's not ideal because it's too quick and we were too young. We were all. I was 17. Peter was younger than me, and there was only Lek that he was. I think he was 19 or 20 at the time. We still seemed quite old, but the other three of us were just like 17 and 16. So it was off the scale. And then, of course, when within 3 months they then put it out in the States, and it started doing the same thing there. So that was, I mean, we'd not even thought about America. In those days, you didn't think, oh, we must break America. It was just another continent on the other side of the world, That was pretty wild.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of people have cited, like, along with the Beatles, Herman's Hermits is one of the forerunners of the British invasion. And, I'm thinking, like, did you guys, like, because I've spoken to some, like, people on the show from the American side of things like, when they were doing stuff back in the 60s, and they're saying, oh, we couldn't get airplay. But I mean, from your perspective, as one of the British kind of, a guy from one of the British groups, I mean, like, did you see it as an invasion of sorts, or was that?
Well, no, not at the time. It's only with hindsight. I mean, the things I've read now in hindsight, all the artists that were big there, the individual artists, your Neil Sedaka's and Fabian and all these people who were happily having loads of hit records, suddenly couldn't get arrested. Nobody wanted to know. They wouldn't play their records. All they were into, this is when the Beatles broke it. Once the Beatles had breached the wall, then all those individual American acts, and a lot of them came over here to the UK, and they made quite a career over here. I mean, to the point that some of them, got successful over here with records, and then went back to the States and had a career. But had they stayed in America, there was just no interest whatsoever. It had completely gone, But I only know that in hindsight. I mean, at the time, we were, well, you can imagine, we're 17 and suddenly we're on a plane. That's the first. Never mind being in America, getting on a plane to go there. We did a week sort of promotion stuff a couple of months after the record came out here. I think in the December we went there for a week, and then in the spring of '65, that's when we started working there properly. And that year just went completely bananas. There were a lot of hits and a lot of tours. Spent most of the year there.
Yeah, definitely a massive year for you guys. I mean, March 1965, you get your first US number one, Mrs. Brown. You have a lovely daughter. I mean, do you remember when that went to number one? Like, when someone told you had gone to number one in the US?
It was an odd one, that, because it was a kind of novelty thing we did in the stage act, and well, we didn't want to record it, but we would, when the first one, I mean, something that was a hit, pretty quickly it was like, well, you've got to make an album, and we didn't have hundreds of songs to record. And it was like, well, we've got this song and we don't really want to do it. But Mickey heard it and he said, well, it's all right, let's do it. So we just did it very quickly and forgot about it. And it was the DJs in America that started picking on it. It wasn't released as a single. It was them sort of playing it, and bit by bit the demand for it built up over the country, and the record company wanted to release it, and Mickey said no, he didn't want to release it. Mm-hmm. So anyway, eventually the demand got so big that we had to. So we put it out, and I think it entered the Billboard chart at the highest number that anyone had ever entered it at. Because normally the Billboard thing, it creeps up, week by week. And this thing came in like number 12 or something. And that sort of, it put us on the map, all over the place, everywhere. So yeah, in that sense, it was very good. It did kind of saddle us with this sort of very English novelty, which none of the other songs were. They were, at that point, they were all just like, good pop songs, Sam Cooke, or Wonderful World, Silhouettes, I mean, it's Something Good. just good pop. Mrs. Brown was something different, and although it was uber successful, it kind of set us on this path of being very English, so it's kind of double-edged thing.
And what was Mickey most like in the studio? Like when he was working and getting you guys to do stuff? I mean, like in terms of production, like how did he work as a producer?
Well, he was brilliant at his job, which was basically picking singles. He didn't make great albums. He wasn't an album man particularly. Obviously, he made albums because you had to produce albums.
Yeah.
He wasn't really one of those producers that goes in and makes an album and then picks a single from it. He was a singles man with us and all the other people he worked with, the Animals and Donovan in particular, because he took Donovan from being a sort of folky guitar man to suddenly making hit records that were produced, like any other record would be produced. But prior to Mickey, they were all, just him and a guitar, very folky, and he was huge. So he just had a knack for sort of getting the right song with the artist at the right time. Some of the things he picked for us, some of them we didn't understand, but there you go, a massive hit. So you can't argue with that, really. He just had a very unerring sort of common touch for what people would like, and what would be a hit. Went in, found the song, and from then on, just made it like as accessible as possible. He was kind of in touch with the people like that, which is not easy to do. Even when you're very successful, it's always like the next record. What's the next record going to be? And it's not obvious. It's not always obvious what it should be. And you can soon sort of tread a path where you just keep repeating yourself, which eventually will fizzle out. People will get sick of that. So you have to a certain extent, keep changing it, but not change it so much that you alienate the fans. And there was one track we did, which was a track he'd done with Donovan, and he'd made the backing track for Donovan, and Donovan decided he didn't want to do it. But we loved this track, and we pestered him. We said, we put it out. He said, it won't work. It won't be a hit. No, we love it. We love it. And so he did. He put it out, and sure enough, I think it got to like number 30 or 25 or something like that, and just disappeared. So yeah, he was one of those. He was a smart cookie. Yeah,
that 60s sound that you guys have on those records. I mean, what kind? I'm kind of thinking, like, what kind of amps were you using at the time, and like gear that what were you using?
I can't remember what we were using when we first went in. It was probably sort of Watkins stuff. It wasn't Marshalls at that time. But once we got to America, then we were using things like Gibson and Fender, and the Fender we used for a long time. The Fender amps, and toured with them. They just fell apart in the end. But they were mostly the amps that we were using.
Yeah, and of course, like today, like back then, that we're talking valve amps. Do you prefer those, like the valve sound, to like the more digital kind of amps?
Yeah. We've got 2 or 3 here now. That one like a Fender Pro, which is sort of medium-sized amp, very heavy. That's a valve amp. And I've got another little one that's and it's just a brilliant sound, very of the time, but and hard to replicate. It's to get that sound. So yeah, good.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier the touring the US, and I know you went on the Ed Sullivan Show, and I think you played your second number one hit, Henry VIII I Am. Do you remember like playing on the Ed Sullivan Show?
I remember being there. I don't know which one it was, whether the first time or the second time, but we sort of upset the crew a bit, because we at some point we either moved the amp or we did something with the amps ourselves, which was like completely out of order, because all these union guys there, that's their job. And suddenly we couldn't understand why they'd taken, so upset about it. But anyway, they quietened down in the end. But yeah, they were wild, because they were right in the middle of New York, and obviously everybody knew you were on. So the streets were just completely full of kids. Getting out of there was quite a dangerous escapade, trying to get in a car, because they all had pairs of scissors, trying to get a bit of hair with this and that. So it was pretty wild. Yeah. So I mean, some of the other big TV shows, they were not in the middle of cities, they were in like lots or industrial estates, whatever. But the the Ed Sullivan one was right in the middle of New York, so that was quite hairy.
What was Ed Sullivan like as a guy? Like what like
It was weird, he was kind of what he looks like, It was a bit remote, and we'd look at him and think, what is the appeal here? It was just kind of he was like from a different world, and yet he got like a third of the country turned it. It was like 30 or 50 millions and millions of people religiously just tuned in every Sunday for it. So you couldn't argue with that. But yeah, he was a strange guy. I mean, a lot of the other TV shows, they were all a lot younger and kind of a lot more accessible. He was yeah, a remote character. Came on, did his announcement, and disappeared again.
yeah, and look, that song Henry VIII AM, I think, and I did some reading into this. I thought it was really interesting that that song's based off a 1910 song originally. That's amazing because how did you guys like take a 1910 song and make it a number one hit in 1965? Like I think that's an amazing thing.
Well, yeah, I don't know exactly who came up with the idea, but once we'd done it, I mean, that was nearly as big as Mrs. Brown, and
Yeah.
it's bizarre. And we didn't have all the words, which I don't know why we didn't. I mean, there was no internet then, so you couldn't just look
Mm.
up. I mean, we could have just got in touch with the publisher and said to send us the words. But we probably just realised too late that we didn't have the words, so we just sang the same words again. It's silly. Yeah, it was a big hit. Yeah, we did that on the Ed Sullivan show. Yeah.
Yeah, and it sounds like from what you kind of were saying before, you guys got a very much a Beatles reception in America. Like, did you like when you kind of touched down on the airport? Did you get that same reception as like the classic Beatles? Like, everyone's at the airport and
Yeah, we did. I mean, not the first time we went, but by the time of '65, then each airport that we went to, you we get off the plane and just drive off the airport. We wouldn't go through the terminal. So there was a lot of that, and on a lot of the tours, then we had our own plane, so that made it easier. But initially it was pretty wild because I don't think anyone had expected it to be so the reception to be so wild. So we didn't have any security. It was a very lax. We had one road manager, and we just arrived. So if you got like 1,000 fans there trying to access it, was pretty difficult. So I mean, usually we just get to a hotel and take a floor of the hotel and just stay there. I mean, you couldn't go anywhere and stay there till the show, sneak out, do the show, and sneak back, and that was it till the next morning. And then leave. So it got to be like that in '65. It was very very wild.
oh, definitely, and of course, 1965 was a massive year for you guys. I mean, you outsold the Beatles. I mean, did you guys ever get to meet the Beatles during that time?
We met them. We didn't meet them over there. We met them in London a couple of times. We did a show with them, I think, at Wembley that we were both on. So we met them all then, and I think we met them in a couple of clubs in town. But I mean, by and large, you really didn't meet anybody else because unless you ended up on the same show or the same TV show, everybody was always just on the road, but obviously in different places. So it was quite rare for you to actually bump into other bands.
And of course, going into 1966, we're getting the psychedelic kind of music happening. Did you guys ever think to go down that road? Because I mean, the Beatles went down that road. The Beach Boys a little bit kind of went down that road.
No, I don't think that was Mickey Mouse road to go on. I don't think that he was interested in that. He just carried on making the records that he did. And although it sort of faded in America, but it wasn't through the lack of success of the records. It was because of a fallout with the company. And the rest of the world, we still had lots of hits after that, which were the same thing. They were just like good pop records.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. You guys certainly did keep going, and I think and of course in 1966, I think that was the year No Milk Today came out as well, and I was surprised to find, Keith, that like looking through you've got all these songs number one, and then this song which is a great song, No Milk Today, and it's only 31 in the US, and I'm thinking like, how is it? Like, because it was a B-side, wasn't it? That was the
Well, no, the reason for that was that for some reason it was put out as a double A side. It was like a B side of Kind of Hush. And Kind of Hush was quite a big hit, number 7 or something. But No Milk Today was on the other side of it. I mean, it should have been just out on its own. It was out on its own everywhere else in the world, but not in the US. So that's why it didn't do so much, because Kind of Hush had been the one that they pushed. But it was a huge hit, particularly in Europe. In America, as soon as you say the band's name, they say Mrs. Brown or anything. In Europe, if you say the band's name, they say No Milk Today, because that was massive here. And it was great song that Graham wrote. It was great. It was good. It was a good track, good record.
Without a doubt. And listening to that song now, it sounds like you're talking about like the early days when you guys were recording, but it sounds like on this recording there's a lot more production kind of going on. Yeah, like how did Mickey Most go about all that?
We had a guy called John Paul Jones who did all the arrangements for the strings, the brass, and anything else orchestral, like the tubular bells that were on No Milk Today and all that. And he was a very clever arranger, and he did all the stuff for us. So it was him. Mickey would say roughly what he wanted, and John would go away and arrange it, and got some great results. Even he came on tour with us once. We did a tour in, I don't know whether it was 68, something like that, in Europe, and he came on tour with us and played organ. And we said, do you want to join our band? And he said, no, I don't think so. And then about 6 months later, he was in Led Zeppelin. a bit of a long way away from Hermits.
A little bit, yeah.
So, yeah, he was the bass player in Led Zeppelin. Yeah.
Moving on to 66, 67. I know there was the hippie era in America, but I'm interested to know, like in the UK, was that kind of prevalent, the hippie kind of era?
Yeah, not as much as San Francisco, but sure, all the fashion came over, and the same kind of records. The English guys were making those kind of records as well. So it was a big mixture then. I mean, we were still making this kind of records we'd always made. But then there's a lot of sort of San Francisco type songs coming out from English groups. So, but not as much as actually in the heart of San Francisco or that kind of thing.
Like, you guys were so young, and I'm just thinking, like, I think you kind of touched on this earlier, and like, how did you, Keith, how did you deal with the fame? Like, how did you process it?
It was as it went on, I think the most difficult part of it, when you're that successful and you're on the road for like 2 months or whatever, it's a long time. And the success, then, that amount of success means that you're kind of a prisoner in your own little space, and there's a lot of hours in the day to fill up, and that's kind of the pressure. Is that, I mean, we didn't even get to do any sound checks or anything, because we could only go to the gig once just to do the show, and that was it. So it was a very bizarre situation, and a lot of hours. So there was a lot of drinking went on, and that can be a road to, not very good. I managed to, I drank as much as the next guy, but somehow I sort of seemed to have escaped from that particular one. But, the others didn't so much. So it's tricky. And also because it was pretty relentless then, because the only way you could promote a record, there was either the radio, there was the TV shows that you had to go and appear on. So, you couldn't send them a video clip. That didn't exist. You had to show up and do it, or you play it on the radio, or you do a live tour. So consequently, everybody was just on the road, like, 300 and odd days a year. So it's obviously it's what we wanted to do. So there's not a problem there. But when you couple that with that amount of success, then it was heavy going, and sometimes you were glad just to get off the road for a break. And also when you're on the road, then you're kind of living in your own little bubble, because you don't really relate to the outside world so much. I mean, you see the news, you can see what's going on, but the days kind of they don't merge, but you become unaware of what day it is. Like Saturday, it feels like a Saturday. And a Sunday usually feels like a Sunday. Well, when you're in that kind of situation, it doesn't. So it could be a Sunday. It could just feel like a Wednesday. Because each day was so much the same, and it was a regimented, right, travel, boom, boom, show, get up, do it all over again. It was tricky, but yeah, I mean, like, drink and drugs. We didn't do so much of the drugs that were there. It was mostly just booze and a lot of it. But that was we got out in the end.
Well, then saying that, then for upcoming musicians that are wanting to go on tour, I mean, what would be your advice to them and how they can do that successfully, and maybe in a way which is balanced so they doesn't get to them?
Yeah, well, I think the whole situation is different now, and in that the way a band would tour now, a band with any kind of success, is vastly different to the way we did it. I mean, we were like uber successful, but we'd still just get on a plane, the five of us and one road manager, right? And we just hit these places. I mean, nothing was organized at all. Whereas now you go on tour, you have a whole sort of entourage of people. You would get to the show at the gig at 5 o'clock. There'd be food laid on, there'd be dinner laid on, and all this kind of stuff, and very much more looked after than the bands would have been in our day. In our day, even if you were touring America and as successful as us, apart from the fact we had our own plane, it was pretty much like touring England in the van, except that we had a bigger van. It was similar. So I think it's probably different in terms of the success and the stress. I think it depends what kind of head you've got on. If you're sensible and you don't sort of just dive in at both ends, then which I think most people nowadays are. There's obviously the odd one that goes off the rails, and then too much of this, that, and the other, and then they're dead. But most of them, it's quite different now, and the atmosphere and the conditions of being in that situation would be different and better. So what you do with it then is up to you. But obviously you can still abuse it. Everything's there. You write that said you want 30 bottles of Jack Daniels, you're going to get them, and if that's the way you're going to go, then you are. But in general, the conditions are better to look after them now.
Yeah, I mean, what has it been like seeing you mentioned the differences between touring then and touring now, and I'm thinking in terms of whether it's music production or just music more just generally, seeing it go from the stuff you were doing back in the the early 60s to the modern era. What has that been like for you, seeing that because there's been so much change in so little time?
Well, it was fascinating. I mean, I had my first studio I built in '68 with Lec, and we built this little. It's just a little demo studio, really. It was just something to do. We didn't have any grand plans for it, so we built that, and that was like 1 track or 2 track, I think, stereo. But underneath we had another studio called Strawberry, where 10cc eventually became based. And they were just like a commercial recording studio. So they was always kind of one move ahead of us in terms of the equipment. So we used to just buy when they upgraded, when they went from 4-track to 8-track, we'd buy their 4-track. And when they went from 8 to 16, we'd buy their 8-track. And we sort of leapfrogged up until we moved completely into the centre of Manchester. And then it was just 24-track. But no, it was fascinating. But, I look back to think some of the stuff we did on 4-track. I mean, you've got 4 tracks to play with. You have to be very inventive, and you have to make decisions all the time to be able to mix it down, to create a spare track, to mix it down. So at the end of the day, if you've got your decisions wrong, it's just a mess because that's too loud, that's not loud enough. That was interesting, and when I think back of the way, some of the ways you'd find to do it, just because that's all you had to work with. I mean, it's like the Beatles making Sergeant Pepper. Obviously they had some very clever engineers there, but it was all 4-track, and they managed to sync 2 4-tracks together to get kind of. They probably got 7-track out of the 8. But even so, when you listen to what's on that record and the mixes and everything, it's amazing. You have to, the way they had to do it was to say, right, we now have to mix these 3 instruments down to 1 track. So this mixer better be right, And it was fascinating. And obviously, when you get to 24-track, that was like a complete luxury where you can split drums over tracks. I don't know. It didn't make it any easier because then you have more choice. And then it went berserk. You got 48 track, and now of course you've got a limitless amount of tracks. So it just makes the you're just putting off the decision of what things are going to do in the mix, which can be good, but it can be just a pain in the neck because you then end up with this massive amount. You've got like 100 tracks there. It's going to take you a month to mix it because you've got to go through all. And that's kind of double-edged thing, But I mean, that's how it is nowadays. You've got Pro Tools, and you can put in there as many tracks as your system will handle. It's just completely different. But it's been an interesting journey when I think back to some of the stuff that we did in the early days and on like 4-track or 8-track. I mean, that's all you had. So you had to think about what you were trying to do and then work out how you were going to do it and break it down. Whereas now you would just go in, do it. Oh, I don't like that. Let's try an alternative. Let's try 15 alternatives, and like just keep them all, and then we'll pick one at the end of the day. It just puts off the decision process. But it's been a fantastic journey, right from like 1 track to limitless. It's amazing.
And of course, you released your first solo album in last year in February. I mean, take me through that. Like, what made you?
With the grand old lockdown, when we were all shut away for a couple of years to ride out the pandemic. And during the course of being in the band, I mean, I wrote songs with Lek when I was in the band that we recorded. And then when I had my studio and I'd left the band, I continued to sort of write songs. But in a bit of a half-hearted way, because really there wasn't much of an outlet for it. In those days, you still need a record deal, a record company, all that stuff, which I wasn't about to do, and I didn't want to. But I still wrote the songs, or I started a lot of songs. So some we finished and demoed, but a lot just got started and were just down as ideas on a cassette and not finished. And I've sort of continued to do that and not finish them off. And during the pandemic, Dan, my son Dan, who's a musician and a writer and works with me now and again, he said, what are you doing, what have you ever done with all these songs? So I said, well, nothing, they just sat there. So he said, he went away and he thought about it, and he said, well, you've got all the situation in America, you've still got the fans there because Peter still tours all the time. So although the name everywhere else might have gone cold, to the younger generation in America, it's not, because he's on the road all the time, and his audience is not just people our own age. It's a lot broader than that, because he's got a radio show there, he does bits of TV, so he appeals to like a much wider demographic than you'd think. So Dan said, well, why don't we do something with it? Why don't you finish them off? We've got a studio here. We don't need a record company anymore. We could finish it off. We could do some marketing, social media, all that stuff. And if nothing else, you could just aim it at the American market and see what happens. I thought, okay, yeah. So I got some new tunes that I'd written and not finished, and I dug out the cassettes from 20 years ago and found 2 or 3 bits. Actually, that's not bad, And so we finished those off, and we got the album together. So probably about a third of it is probably stuff from years and years. I mean, you wouldn't know which, I don't think, but they're from stuff I wrote when I was in Manchester in the 80s. Or the idea was from there, the music was from there, and maybe I didn't finish the lyric, that kind of thing. But it was a mixture of old and new. And it got a nice response. People seemed to like it, and it was very enjoyable. So I thought, right, well, if nothing else, we'll just carry on doing that, So
yeah, and it's, as you say, I mean, you couldn't tell what's new or what's old. It's pretty consistent in that way, yeah. But a track that I loved, and I really love this track off your album. I Got Nothing On. I think that's a fantastic song. And like how did that song come to be? Is that because is that a new one? Is that an old one? Like, yeah,
that's new. Well, we've got a place in France, so we go down there a few times a year, and there's a guitar there, and every time I'm there, I get this guitar out. And I usually come up with a few ideas, and they're just on my phone, and I leave them. And that was one of those from probably about 5 years ago. All the music was there, but no words. And I just always like the chords of it, so it's a bit strange. So So I finished that off, and I particularly just liked the way it sounded at the end. It was exactly how I wanted it to sound. Yeah, that was cool. That was one from. I think it was probably about 5 years ago I wrote it originally, and then dug out the thing and finished it off. It just works. Some of them just work easily, and that one seemed to just click. So it was good.
Is the album on vinyl or CD? Like, can people buy it?
We intended doing it on vinyl, but unfortunately, at the time, we were every vinyl pressing plant we contacted, the time span was something like 11 months to get vinyl, mainly because vinyl had a bit of a resurgence in popularity, and there was only so many plants in the world that can still do it. And I think Ed Sheeran and Adele had both said, right, we want this record, their latest album at the time, to be on vinyl, and said, right, we want 500,000 of this and 500,000 of that. Well, that just swamped the world, all the plants. So anybody that went in, it's just the same for everybody. You were getting quoted like, well, 6 months is the earliest, or 11 months is it was just crazy. So no, we didn't do the vinyl, but we did CDs. Yeah, so it's on CD and it's on all the digital platforms, so the CD, yeah, it worked well.
Yeah, well, that all sounds fantastic, Keith, and I thank you so much for making the time. It sounds like out of your busy schedule to do this, so thank you so much.
It's no problem. It's my pleasure. It's good to talk to you.
That was rhythm guitarist of Herman's Hermits, Keith Hopwood. If you'd like to check out Keith's new music, you can head to his website at keithhopwood.com. Remember to share this episode with other music fans. And if you really enjoyed this edition, we'd love it if you'd leave a review. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Vinyl Vibes. And to all you music lovers out there, stay groovy.